More than R1 billion later, with 874 pages produced so far, and perhaps thousands more to come still when the rest of the volumes are released later on. Does the State Capture Commission report answer that central question? Was the state captured? The answer is an unequivocal yes from the Commission. And tonight on the program, we'll look at some of the evidence that the Commission has produced or presented to prove their conclusion. The Watchdog starts now. The South African state was captured. That's a conclusion Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo and his team have reached. Their reasons for arriving at that conclusion, however, will only be given when they table part 3 of their report next month. Yesterday, the Deputy Chief Justice symbolically handed over part 1 of the report, which only dealt with South African Airways and its subsidiaries, the Gupta family-owned New Age newspaper, and the South African Revenue Services, SARS. Here's what the person responsible for setting up that commission in the first place, Advocate Thuli Madonsela, the former public protector, had to say this morning on our sister program, Morning Live, after looking at the report that was released yesterday.
The Commission has confirmed that there was state capture. I also think that it is possibly a new chapter in our democracy where we look carefully at the people we put in power and where the public stays engaged as part of social accountability to make sure that democracy is not hijacked. And in this regard, we're grateful firstly to the chairperson of the Commission, Acting Chief Justice Zondo, for the work, but more importantly, grateful to the President for making the report available to everyone so that there's social accountability. Everyone has their own understanding of what its contents are, and everyone positions themselves to play a part in the next chapter. But having said that, President Zuma changed fundamentally the terms of reference of this Commission of Inquiry. And as a result, it's taken us 4 years, loss of evidence, loss of time, loss of money, and of course, a loss of trust in the process. You will recall that the commission that was ordered, not recommended, ordered by the public protector and endorsed by a court of law had a very narrow focus. It was just looking at whether or not the Minister of Finance, firstly, was fired with the influence of the Gupta family, and if this was part of a broader systemic capture of the state and repurposing it for the business interests of companies that are co-owned by the then president's son and the Zuma family. And whether this extended throughout the state, affecting how ministers were appointed in strategic portfolios, how they were fired, appointment of DGs, appointment of boards and CEOs of SOEs, etc. So that's all that we were supposed to do based on the original whistleblowing by SABC Jonas, and then followed by Themba Maseko, Vici Mentor, and many others. So if we had done the investigation that was ordered by the public protector and endorsed by a court of law, this process would have been shorter.
a very crucial context from the former public protector who was the person in the first instance to actually insist on this inquiry. And as we continue to examine what the Commission has come up with, I think that particular context is going to be very critical. And what do the country's president and his deputy think now that they too have had a chance to go through the report?
What we've been through state capture, and the Commission confirms for yes, there was state capture. This country must never, ever, ever go through state capture ever again. So that every route it must teach us, or when we see signs or indications of whomsoever, it can be at national level, at provincial level, at local level. These are signs that capture, and we are going to stop it in its tracks.
It's a challenge that we're prepared to face as the ANC, and we have gone through this process up to the release. So let's deal with the outcome. Yeah, but I don't think it will further divide the ANC.
Well, opposition parties have also weighed in.
The first part of the state capture report is out. The question is, what now? Receiving the first volume of the state capture report, President Ramaphosa announced that government would wait for a full report before pronouncing on any action going forward. However, other institutions are not prohibited from taking action within their mandate.
This process, which we expect will culminate in the submission of the report and implementation to Parliament by the end of June 2022, does not prevent other institutions from acting within their statutory mandate on any of the findings and recommendations of the report.
The second largest party in Parliament, the DA, wants action to be taken swiftly.
I'm calling on President Cyril Ramaphosa to urgently table the first Zondo report in Parliament so that the legislative wing of our constitutional democracy can get to work studying its findings and taking the necessary remedial action.
The Commission spent 3 years on its inquiries. It was given 6 extensions as it unraveled the threats of state capture. While doing its work, the Commission interviewed more than 300 witnesses. The Freedom Front Plus says the recommendations must be implemented.
The success of the whole Zondo Commission will be determined whether the President is going to implement the recommendations made by the Zondo Commission. It cost the taxpayers of South Africa almost 1 billion rand. In part 1 of the report, one recommendation, for instance, is an independent anti-corruption authority or agency for South Africa. The Freedom Front Plus will support such.
Handing over the first part of the report, the chairperson of the State Capture Commission, Raymond Zondo, vowed that all the volumes would be handed over by the end of February this year. Political parties have welcomed the report.
This is long overdue. This report should have been with the president some months ago, but we're all aware that Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo kept on postponing and asking for more time. But we are excited that finally the report is with the president. Our only concern now is that we know that President Cyril Ramaphosa is going to sit with the report for months, and that is going to keep South Africans in the dark.
What is left now is for the law enforcement agencies to chase all those criminals who are mentioned in this report. Arrest them, prosecute them, confiscate all their assets.
The volume released this week showed that approximately 1,438 persons were implicated. More than 3,000 persons were given Rule 3.3 notices and over 75,000 pages of oral evidence were collected. Ntantla Khatlane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, in addition to political parties, civil society organizations, lobby groups, and some of the country's leading lawyers have also had their say.
Chairperson, may I not respond to the question so that I don't incriminate myself?
Former SAA board chair Myeni continued to invoke her right to remain silent each time she appeared before the commission. The commission conducted hearings for more than 400 days since 20 August 2018. In the proceedings, more than 300 witnesses gave evidence and about 1,438 persons and entities were implicated. The report focused mainly on former SAA board chair Myeni during testimonies over the years. Findings in the report affirmed that there was a steady decline in the quality and effectiveness of governance at SAA following the arrival of Myeni and her co-board member, Yake Kwenana, who was the chairperson of SAA Technical.
She has been found wanting, especially with the way she managed that airline and how funds have been flowing from other entities through to the Jacob Zuma Foundation, from the province of the Free State. There are a number of areas where she needs to be held accountable.
The report says things turned south in early 2014 when the majority of board members complained to then Public Enterprises Minister Malusi Gigaba about Myeni's leadership. It says despite the seriousness of the matter, she was not called to account for her conduct. In October 2014, when Gigaba was replaced by Len Brown, Myeni was retained despite a barrage of accusations against her.
The ministers who were involved must also face accountability legally, and we must ensure that once the investigation takes place, because it was clear that there was a dereliction of duty. It was clear that there was political pressure being effected to ensure that certain wrong dealings, whether it was the swap of the deal, whether it was the Mumbai route, and the various iterations of how SAA came to be in the state that it is.
The investigation focused on procurements undertaken by SAA and its associated companies. The commission says it became clear that acts of corruption and fraud within state-owned enterprises usually occurred in the procurement side of the business. The report highlights heightened incidents of corruption and fraud during both Myeni and Kwenana's tenures at SAA and its technical division. It also reveals the considerable cost of state capture. According to the Commission's report, the costs are not just measured in the millions of rands lost to taxpayers, but also includes people's wrecked careers, the emotional trauma experienced by managers at SAA, and the precarious livelihoods of those who subsequently faced joblessness. The report states that Cabinet's decision-making seems to have been largely motivated by the personal preferences of a certain president.
State capture works in this way. You capture the president and his party capture the state uses the deployment committee to allow people like Myeni. You can look at the various appointment of director generals and board members who end up at many of these institutions. And the net consequence of it is that those who are meant to be protecting the resources of the state become part of the criminal enterprise or the privatization of state resources.
The report concludes that SAA depreciated to an entity engulfed in fraud and corruption during Myeni's tenure.
I think she was definitely a pawn or a serious participant in state capture. On a number of occasions, two ministers of finance had raised their concerns about her conduct in fulfilling the chairperson's role at a very important state-owned entity at SAA. And here we have that airline today struggling to survive. It has been decimated, and yet it was a very well-run and flourishing airline prior to her taking over.
Regarding SA Express, the Commission recommends that all government and state officials, as well as private individuals, who were involved in the looting scheme at the entity be charged.
Parliament failed to do its job, and therefore a state of capture commission was then begun. Given that the state of capture commission shows, it indicates not only that Ms. Myeni unduly used her influence in terms of her own connection to President Zuma and the collective ANC in that sense, it shows that for state capture to thrive, you need all organs to work together. You need the audit companies to work together. You need ultimately the political interference to work, and all the board members to be able to be complicit in what has now been seen as the looting and the mismanagement of the state airline.
Vivian Nettison, the sole shareholder and director of New Solutions, was allegedly involved in laundering 9.9 million rand of the money that the company Coroneka received from SA Express pursuant to its unlawful dealings with the Northwest government. Coroneka was placed in charge of ground handling services at the Mafikeng and Pilanesberg airports. The Commission therefore recommends that Nettison's conduct becomes an important part of the authorities' further investigation into the matter.
When they do make the decision to prosecute, they do so on the basis that they have a solid and reasonably winnable case. It does not necessarily follow that they will do as the DCJ has ordained. The DCJ will make recommendations, and recommendations are exactly that. They may either be accepted or rejected.
The Commission further suggests that the asset forfeiture unit of the NPA take steps to recover monies obtained unlawfully. Notando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
After the break, we speak to a person who was one of the inquiry's star witnesses. Outspoken former Prasa and now Transnet chairperson, Popo Molefe reacts to the report and its implications, the conclusions it may have on the country's state-owned enterprises going forward. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog, and tonight we're looking at the implications of Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo's report, which was released and symbolically handed over to the president yesterday. As you would have seen, those who have been watching, we've been getting reactions from political parties, civil society organizations, the president and the deputy president, but also the person who was responsible for putting the inquiry into existence in the first instance, and that is former public protector Thuli Madonsela. And in her comments, which she made on our sister program Morning Live this morning, she did give a context which I thought was very important. The fact that former President Jacob Zuma fundamentally changed the terms of reference of this inquiry, which meant that it has now taken 4 years for it to be able to be in a position of putting together a report. But also from what she said when she was commenting this morning, a lot of evidence was actually, lost over the period. But also, it also meant that because the terms were now broadened, a lot of things kind of fell through the cracks. But my next guest is the former chairperson of Prasa and now chairperson of Transnet. He was one of the witnesses who came before that inquiry. I thought it would be interesting to hear from someone who actually participated in this process, just what you think, Mr. Molefe, overall of the report, now that you've managed to find some time to go through it, or at least parts of it.
Well, Vuyo, from the outset, when the public protector made recommendations that a state capture commission be appointed, it was in recognition of the fact that the country had a myriad of problems that needed to be addressed if we were to maintain good governance in the country and ultimately achieve the strategic goals of our liberation struggle. The fact that the Commission, after 4 years of hard work and many difficulties, some people who did not really want to give evidence that reflected the true facts, has now been able to release the report is something commendable. And we should congratulate the Deputy Chief Justice Zondo for ultimately, releasing this report after that a marathon of hearing and investigation. We are delighted that ultimately we have something that provides a program from which the government of the Republic of South Africa, which is the executive authority, and the state, the various arms of the state, law enforcement agencies, the police, hawks you call them, and ordinary criminal investigating agencies, as well as the National Prosecuting Authority, can now begin to act decisively with the objective of restoring confidence of the public in these institutions, and of course, in a sense, also restoring their own integrity as institutions. But above all, of course, to make sure that those who are to be held accountable are so held accountable, be they politicians, ordinary civil servants, those in the private sector, and those who were just being used as the runners, but did not avail themselves of the opportunity to disclose what they knew about the corruption and fraud that had taken place.
Were you surprised, if I may start there, at the finding or the conclusion of the Commission that indeed there was state capture?
I was not surprised, Vuyo, because as you may recall, at some point I appeared like I was a lone voice speaking against corruption when I was the chairman of Prasa. And I'm sure there would have been some people in little corners in the party that I belong to who would have said, but Comrade Popo should not be saying what he's saying because this is damaging to the image of the party. So, I mean, I was expecting this outcome to be there because even as we went through that long fight, there was hardly a whimper in any corners within my own organization or the government that said, we think that this man is doing the right thing as he's defending the values that our movement espoused and the values that reflect the nature of society that many years of our sacrifices of struggle were intended to achieve. So I was not surprised. I was expecting that this would be the outcome.
Now, the party you belong to is gathering in Limpopo this weekend, and today, as they were doing the build-up to the weekend, journalists asked both the president and the deputy president for their initial reaction, and those are the bites we played earlier. From what you heard, the little you were able to hear them say at the beginning of the program, and from the conversations, of course, you would have been having with some of your comrades during the course of this inquiry, and as this day of the release of the report was nearing. Do you have a sense that things are going to change for the better?
Well, Vuyo, I think whether things change for the better is a function of the balance of forces. If the balance of forces within the party and within society are tilting in favor of those who are predominantly implicated in this corruption, then we're going to have an uphill battle to make sure that things change for the better. But I think what we can rely on is the fact that it is no longer a one-man show or a one-party show where you rely on one party to make a determination whether things will change for better or not. I think over the last 10 years, there has been a resurgence of civil society organization and the consolidation thereof, and a greater outspokenness of civil society. And to that extent, I think the initiative no longer belongs to the politicians, but to society through their various institutions and organs. And to that extent, therefore, I think whether certain individuals like it or not, I think civil society will make sure that what is best for the people of South Africa, particularly the poor people, in whose name and who themselves were part of this struggle. The struggle was conducted to change fundamentally their conditions of living for the better, to make sure that we move away from a situation where sectarian institutions called political parties govern, to a point where the people govern as is envisaged in the democratic constitution of our country, which was adopted in 1996. To that extent, I think society has reached inexorably a point where it cannot be stopped from ensuring that the right things are done, justice is restored, and real democracy is placed in the real power is placed in the hands of the people.
I think that's a very important point to make, because indeed, I mean, to get the ANC to sit up and notice even before those in Parliament and at Luthuli House and elsewhere could even begin, to do something about the issues that society was raising. It took civil society to agitate for that change, and that indeed is a very important point to make. Now, the Commission from the part 1 of the report found that President Zuma fled the Commission because he knew that there were questions that would be put to him which he would not have been able to answer. Now, he's not alone. There are a lot of other people who went, as you said earlier, as forthcoming as they should have. Even the runners among them who perhaps you would have thought, don't have a lot to lose. Do you not think that, in the next few weeks and months, we are going to see this group of people re-emerging? Because after all, it may well be the ANC, that, is the last barrier, or stops them or prevents them from facing the music based on the back of the decisions that they've taken not to come before the inquiry. It may well be the ANC that stands between them and jail. It may well be the ANC that stands between them and hunger and poverty, because the largesse, that they were able to derive, from their association or from leadership positions that they were or have been occupying within the ANC, all of those things may change or actually come to an abrupt end. Do you not foresee a situation where that whole block, may again regroup and put up a big fight?
Well, I suppose, Vuyo, it is expected that those who find themselves vulnerable may attempt to defend themselves, but that probably could be considered to be the proverbial, the last kick of the dying horse. The reality is that the wheel has turned to a point where that kind of resistance will not survive. But those who knowingly did not disclose the truth that they knew are going to face very serious difficulties, because if you think of the PRECA, which is the Prevention of and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, provides for, it says that to the extent that you know of corruption and you do not disclose, you yourself are guilty of an offense. I think whether those people ultimately are brought to book is a function of fact and evidence that the Hawks, various investigating agencies and the National Prosecuting Authority would place before the court, and it will also be a function of how thoroughly they prepare their case to make sure that they achieve the objectives of the mandate, constitutional mandate defined for them in our Constitution.
Now, I mean, as a former chairperson of Prasa, who knew and, before the commission detailed some of the wrongs you saw there, and currently chairperson of another huge parastatal, Transnet, which too was hollowed out, and a lot is going to come around what happened there. And I mean, one of its former CEOs, actually, the commission is recommending that he be prosecuted. But from what you've seen lately, are there increased levels of accountability now? Is there less political pressure that provide fertile ground for the wrongs to be committed? What about the work of the deployment committee, which was put into sharp focus during those hearings? What about the pawns? The people who were pawns in this big game, but of course who were useful for the powerful people who derived huge financial benefits from the wrongs that were being committed. Just looking at the past year or two, have those things changed, or is that environment or atmosphere beginning to change for the better?
Vuyo, where I am in Transnet, I must say that there is no political pressure on us. And in any event, the kinds of people who have been appointed to the board of Transnet and the executive team of Transnet are the sorts of people who would not buckle under pressure of politicians. But you know that I don't allow politicians to manipulate me. I was in the trenches with them. We were comrades. We were operating with each other on the basis of equality. It cannot be that Now that I am no longer a politician, I am in a state-owned company, I would allow them to flout the principles, the policies, and the values of the organization for personal gains. So it cannot happen to the extent that for as long as I am there. Well, there are others. I must say that I'm still concerned about the weaknesses that I continue to see in Prasa. We had cases there. We won cases of corruption. One of them was in respect of the not fit for purpose locomotives, for which 2.6 billion had already been paid, and the court ruled that the 13 locomotives that they had delivered be returned to the supplier, and that the 2.6 billion rands be recovered by Transnet. That has not been done. I'm advised that Transnet thinks that it can adjust those locomotives, but we know that Vosloo, which was the manufacturer of the locomotives, after attempting to adjust the locomotives, it concluded that they cannot be adjusted to the required level of compliance with the safety requirement, both of Transnet, rail network, as well as the rail safety regulator. So I don't know. We're still waiting to hear how the new board thinks it can resolve this problem. And I think the government has to be decisive in dealing with these questions, because we can't keep saying we are fighting corruption. We win a case in court and nothing happens about the billions that the company has lost as a result of irregular procurement, not fit for purpose locomotives, and the 2.6 billion rand paid, a lot of which in advance, when only 13 locomotives had been released. So I do say that I do think that the situation has changed, but obviously those in executive authority have got to make sure that the entities that report to them also safeguard the interests of the public, and they act in a manner compliant with the provisions of the Constitution, Section 217 of the Constitution, but also in respect of the rulings that the courts in this country have given. The President, in one of his comments yesterday, said he congratulated and thanked the whistleblowers who came forward. But what the President did not say is what he was going to do about those whistleblowers who are being tormented. He did refer to those who have lost their jobs, but others are being tormented and forced out of job by entities that report to ministers who report to him. I think the President has to deal with this question. It cannot just be something that we glibly go over. It's important that we firmly address these questions so that we send a message to whistleblowers that the government cares, the public cares, and South African society cares.
Dr. Molefe, thank you very much for your time and insights this evening. And that's the former chairperson of Prasa and now chairperson of Transnet. He was a contributor. He appeared before the inquiry, shared his insights, and as you have just heard him say, pleased with what he has seen so far coming out of that process, and is also hopeful that going forward, all the things, the problems that were identified and everything that goes with that are indeed going to be addressed. After the break, we continue to look at what the Commission says about parastatal South African Airways, about the largesse derived by the Gupta-owned New Age newspaper. We ask experts what they think is going to happen next, given the recommendations that the Commission has now made. That's coming up after this short break. Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. Now, among the findings of the Commission is that South African Airways declined during the tenure of Myeni as board chairperson to an entity wrecked by corruption and fraud. There was a wanton disregard for accountability, and those in charge, Myeni among them, were motivated by their own personal interest. And despite this, Myeni was retained as the airline's chairperson, well beyond the point at which she should have been removed. Well, we did, of course, reach out to Myeni, and she declined to come on the program and respond to those findings. But let's take you back to some of what she said when she appeared before Judge Zondo.
The reason why I wouldn't want, in fact, I don't want to use the word I refuse, chairperson.
Yes.
I did indicate from the beginning that I respect the commission. I would prefer not to answer that question, chairperson.
Yes.
Because, as you have explained to me, that I must add why I think I do not prefer to answer. I don't want to answer that question, chairperson, because I do not wish to incriminate myself.
That is the question about whether you were aware that you had certain obligations under the PFMA. That's the question that you are saying you would like not to answer. Is that correct?
That's the question I say I would not like to answer, chairperson.
Yes, of course.
For the reason I have explained, yes.
Yes, just so that we fit within the legal framework, I think you have made the point that you wouldn't like to say you refuse out of respect. You say you prefer, but we can take that what you intend is to refuse. It's just that you would like to say prefer. You prefer not to answer as respect, but otherwise your position is that you are refusing, but you don't feel comfortable to say that. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed, chairperson.
Yes, okay, all right.
Section 50 of the PFMA requires accounting authorities, such as the board of SAA, to act with fidelity, honesty, and integrity. Were you aware of that obligation while you served on the board of SAA?
Chairperson, with respect to the question, may I not answer the question in case I incriminate myself?
Well, for another perspective on the report that Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo has released so far, Volume 1, we're now joined by independent political analyst Theo Venter. Theo, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Now, despite the fact that people like Myeni refused to answer, questions, in spite of the fact that President Jacob Zuma, as the Commission observes, fled the Commission because he knew that there were questions that would be put to him which he would not have been able to answer. In spite of all of that, none of that, I should say, stopped the Commission from arriving at the conclusion that there was capture.
Yes, absolutely. They arrived at that position because all the opportunity was given for people to participate in the commission, and if you chose not to, or if you chose to do what Myeni did, which was also playing around with technicalities and hiding behind things or evading certain questions, I think in the end, the judge used his prerogative, and he used what he has under the Commissions Act to make a finding. And I think the finding in the end not only involves Jacob Zuma and Dudu Myeni, but it also involves Malusi Gigaba and a few others, in that there was a serious breakdown in governance. There was a serious breakdown in how SOEs should be governed in terms of their position as state-owned enterprises within the organs of state.
In fact, in addition to the people you've just mentioned, there's a whole host of others, who have been implicated in all sorts of things. And I'm going to mention a few enablers, as they are called in the report. And among them is Brian Molefe, who is a former Transnet CEO. Colin Majila, who is the former ESCOM CEO. You have Mzwanele Manyi, who is the former GCIS Director General. You have Mbonisos Gonyela, who is the former Transnet General Manager, among them. So these are the people that the Commission found were enablers. In other words, allowed this to happen, or cleared the way for all for the wrongdoing to actually happen.
Yes, absolutely. And what I liked about the analysis that the Commission used was also to refer to some of the resistors, those guys that actually tried not to do it, but eventually were kind of forced into corners, and they were put in a very bad spot eventually. But I think the facilitators and the enablers I think especially the facilitators, which thought that they may come out lightly out of this, also got nabbed by this report. And we must remember, it's only the first volume. We're going to see 2 further volumes. And what is interesting to me at this point is that there was very little judgment on the position or the role of Mr. Zuma. Certain recommendations were made about specific individuals, very specifically what must be done. But about Zuma, the report is still fairly silent, and I personally think it's going to stay that way.
Now, the Commission is recommending prosecution among the people who they say should be prosecuted is Dudu Myeni, the former chairperson of SAA, as well as Brian Molefe, the former Transnet CEO, for possible fraud, corruption, contravention of the PFMA. Now, knowing what we know about the capacity of state law enforcement agencies, what are the chances of us seeing this happening sooner rather than later?
Fairly slim, and I think we must be honest about that. If we take a timeline, we're talking about things that started way back in 2013, 2014. In some cases, if you go back to New Age and other things, it's 2010, 2011, 2012. The fact that we haven't done anything yet means that we will wait for a long time. And we have had a few court cases where we saw the kind of resistance put up and the kind of technicalities, especially by Mr. Zuma. And I don't think any of the other people may use lesser legal strategies. So it will take a long time. And I think the Commission is there to make a finding that, yes, state capture took place. But I think from here onwards, it's going to be very difficult for some of those people identified by the Commission to play other roles in society. And I think this brings this Commission closer to some of the evidence of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was actually to put it out there for society to know. But I think the ability to really take some of these things to court and get to a finding soon, limited.
We have 30 seconds. Do you think this report strengthens the hand of those within the governing party, who, of course, happen to be occupying, high positions in the state, to actually, start doing the right thing or getting their party organization to do the right thing? Or do you think there's also that may well be the case, but also what will also be the case is the fact that those who are negatively impacted or who are coming out of this process looking bad will put up resistance and will put up a big fight?
Well, let's put it politically. I think politically the question or the request by the president to wait 4 months and then to review or to provide his reaction, and then for Parliament to look at the document, means that these findings are going to play out politically in the second half of 2022. I think this first half of 2022 is going to be all about what do we do, how do we do it, and what we can do. Second half, I think, is this decision-making part of this year.
Okay, well, we'll see what actually happens. Special thanks to you, Theo Venter, who is an independent political analyst. And that's our show for this evening. To join us again tomorrow, 8 p.m. sharp. Good night.